12 times Pokemon brutally died in Pokemon Explained. From dying of old age to getting burnt to death, these are the top 12 times Pokemon have brutally died in Pokemon. And I'm gonna be ranking these deaths from the least brutal, working our way up to the most brutal death. And for the least brutal, let's give a shout out to the Pokemon that lived a fulfilled life before it died of old age, Trevenant. In the 12th episode of the Sun and Moon series, Ash got sent back in time by a Celebi. It was in the past he encountered this totem, Trevenant, named Elder, who gave Ash a Furium Z crystal for his Torracat. When Ash returned to the present, he discovered that Elder was now just a dead tree trunk covered in weeds. I imagine this Trevenant lived a full life playing in the sun all day and handing out crystals to time travelers before it finally died of old age. And boy, does it look old! Following up that least brutal death is another Pokemon that died of old age, Stoutland. This death was so not brutal. It even happened off screen. It's kind of ironic because Stoutland's death was not brutal to Stoutland, but it was very brutal to me. It all happened in the 21st episode of the Sun and Moon series, before Ash captured his Litten. And before Ash captured his Litten, it was raised in the wild by this Stoutland. As it turns out, the Stoutland got older than your great-great-grandpa, so there's no way it could cheat death. The crazy part is, Stoutland knew what was up, and it didn't want to hurt us and his buddy Litten with his death, so he snuck away while Litten was sleeping to die off screen. Another really crazy thing about this death is that while Stoutland was sneaking away to go die, Litten had a very similar dream where Stoutland was fading away into oblivion. I bet Stoutland didn't feel any pain as he died, but these next guys felt a little bit of pain. I tell you, the Pokemon deaths in this video are about to get really brutal, because next on our list are these 3 guys who died from being lab rats. Can you imagine these innocent Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and Charmander dying because somebody decided they couldn't be cloned? You see, these 3 innocent Pokemon were captured by these scientists who wanted nothing more than to clone them. And this team of scientists was headed by this guy, Dr. Fuji. This is about to get real brutal. Dr. Fuji was on a mission to clone Amber, his daughter, Mew, and these 3 guys. What he didn't know was that the subconscious of his daughter, Amber 2, managed to create a remember place where she spent her time with Squirtle, Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Mewtwo. But this didn't last for long because Squirtle, Bulbasaur, and Charmander slowly faded away from the remember place as their bodies in real life just disintegrated in their giant test tubes. This seems like a painless death when you think about how the Pokemon were not even conscious as their bodies disintegrated, but think about it. These guys were hunted down and probably separated from their trainers and families, and then taken to a secret lab on an island where they were used to conduct experiments until their bodies couldn't take it anymore. That's brutal, don't you think? Oh, but it gets more brutal with our next guy, an electric-type Pokemon that died from an electric-type chandelier. Shocking, isn't it? I'm talking about the very first death to ever happen in the entire series. The time that Pikachu died in the Tower of Terror, alongside his trainer, of course. I'm ranking this death so low, even if getting shocked to death is quite brutal, because it just doesn't seem that brutal to me considering the circumstances. It just feels like a tree dying because it had so much fruit, or a chocolate bar drowning to death in a bowl of chocolate syrup. What had happened was, Pikachu and Ash ventured to the Tower of Terror in Lavender Town because Ash wanted to get a ghost-type Pokemon. While in the tower, they got haunted by Haunter, smacked with a paper fan by Gengar, and tricked to crash into the ground by Gengar and Haunter. As they crashed to the ground, the walls and ceiling of the Raggedy Castle cracked open, and a chandelier above them came crashing down. It crushed poor Pikachu's body, but it didn't die yet. What killed Pikachu was the electric shock that came after the chandelier fell. In case you didn't get the memo, Pikachu eats electricity for breakfast, so it just didn't make sense for him to die from the same thing that makes him feel alive. No, wait, that's Ash, the thing that makes him be alive. And Lucario cannot relate to being alive because it died from having his life force drained out of him. That's right, Lucario faded into thin air because he sacrificed his life to save Mew and the Tree of Beginning in Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. Lucario wouldn't have even gotten himself dead if he didn't join Ash on a quest to rescue Pikachu after it was accidentally taken by Mew to the Tree of Beginning. beginning. As the quest got to a high point, these shiny crystals, which are orange blob thingies in disguise, which are the white blood cells the tree of beginning produces as antibodies to protect itself against parasites, erased every human present from existence. But you see, Mew used its powers to neutralize the tree's defenses and bring all the humans back to life. And because Mew used its powers, Mew got drained of so much energy that it left him on the brink of death, as well as the tree that went berserk. This is where our main guy, Lucario, comes in. Lucario and Ash combine their auras to reverse the self-destruction, heal Mew, and pacify the tree. But in doing so, got their life force drained out of them. So Lucario pushed Ash away, so only one life force would get drained away, and this draining slowly killed Lucario. Just imagine your life slowly draining away from you. I imagine that's the pain our guy Lucario went through as he faded away. But that pain does not compare to the pain that Big Mama Marowak felt when she died from getting beat to death. While watching the second episode of Pokemon Origins, I got to learn something horrible that happened to a good Pokemon. Even though this death happened off screen, it does nothing to reduce the brutality of it. You see, when Red arrived at Lavender Town and visited the Pokemon house, he was told by Reina that the resident Cubone was nearly poached by Team Rocket before Cubone's mother, Marowak, intercepted the act. And this interception aided Cubone in escaping. Apparently, Team Rocket got very angry by Marowak's actions, so they beat it to death with a stun baton. Apart from literally getting beaten to death by two guys with a stun baton, you have to understand that Marowak's child had to watch this happen. That's more brutal than a child having to watch their mother get. Apparently, witnessing its mama get beat to death really did a number on Cubone, so it got hostile towards humans, at least until it got reunited with the spirit of Big Mama Marowak. But you know what Pokemon did not get reunited after its death? Latios. After I get into further details about this brutal death, did you know that Latios is the first Pokemon to die in the anime without getting resurrected? And how did he die? Well, he flew himself into this large tsunami, crashed into the waves, exploded, and transformed into the new Soul Dew. You see, the movie Pokemon Heroes Latios and Latias revolves around a mystical item called a Soul Dew, which is capable of raising the water levels in Alto Mar to effectively drown the inhabitants. So throughout the movie, all Team Rocket tried to do was steal the Soul Dew for evil reasons. Thankfully, we had the heroic Latios to save the day. You see, after he crashed into this wave, he used up his power and sacrificed himself to save the city from destruction. Damn! Even crashing into a pool hurts me. I can only imagine how it must have felt for Latios to crash into this huge wave. And judging from how bright this light is, I can only guess he exploded from the inside out. Or the light was so bright, it charred him until he was nothing but a Soul Dew. But such brutality is nothing compared to the way Jan's Talonflame met his end. Talonflame died from getting turned into stone and then getting shattered into a million pieces. Damn! Imagine having your inside slowly harden into stone while you're still conscious, right before you get smashed into bits. All this happened in the 5th special episode of Pokemon the series, XY, The Legend of X, Y, and Z. In the episode, a story is told about Jan, a man from Kalos' ancient past who sought to defeat Svetal to prevent a prophecy about Svetal destroying his home. When Jan encountered Veltal, he had his Talonflame battle it, but Veltal used Oblivion Wing to turn Talonflame to stone. This caused Talonflame to fall to the ground from the air and shatter to pieces. Still, such brutality does not compare to what happened to the Pokemon that were on this ship when it crashed. I imagine the ones that didn't get burned to death in the fire that engulfed the ship drowned to their death. This is Hunter J's ship, and what had happened was this ship got destroyed by Meesprit and Uxie in the 151st episode of the Diamond and Pearl series. They took out the ship's engines with future sight, and the impact of the attack made the ship crash into the whirlpool of Lake Valor and explode. The thing is, while the ship crashed, there was some captured Pokemon aboard the ship. There was an Aradios, a Salamence, and even a Drapion, and I imagine they either drowned or died in the explosion, but it still doesn't compare to how the deaths of Raikou, Entei, and Suicune happened in the lore. You see, a long time ago, the Ukritik Brass Tower was a place where humans could make contact with Ho-Oh. But one day, lightning struck the tower and caused it to go up in flames. But then when a great rain fell, the fire went out. What no one knew was that there were 3 nameless Pokemon stuck in the fire, and they had gotten burned to death in the flames. The pain must have been so excruciating, and they probably cried and tried to get out, but there was no way they were getting out of the fire. They must have cried until their souls gave up, their bodies got smoked, and their bones turned to ash. Thankfully, after the fire went out, the legendary Pokemon Ho-Oh came down from the sky and used its rainbow-colored shining power to restore the 3 Pokemon, transforming them into the legendary beasts. 3 legendary Pokemon who people would later call Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Raikou represents the lightning that hit the tower. Suicune represents the wind and rain that took the fire out. And Entei represents the fire that burnt the tower. If it makes you feel any better, these are not the only Pokemon to die by fire. And before we get to that, there's a very brutal death. This was the fate of the Pokemon Luxray. In the I Choose You movie, the supporting character Sorrel gave us a story about how his family's pet Pokemon Luxray died when he was just a child. As it turns out, one day as Sorrel was playing in the snow, he got lost and couldn't find his way home. So Luxray sensed that his master was in danger and left in search for him. By the time Luxray found Sorrel, he had already begun to fall victim to the freezing temperatures. Knowing that his master was near death, Luxray cuddled up with Sorrel. His actions saved his master from the cold. However, when Sorrel woke up, he found Luxray frozen in the snow. I don't know what's more painful, Luxray freezing to death or the pain and trauma that Sorrel faced because of the death. But I do know the most brutal death on this list is Harriet Snubble's death. This death is so brutal, there's literally a brutality move in Mortal Kombat just like it. This poor guy got burned to death. What makes it more brutal than the 3 nameless Pokemon I mentioned earlier is the fact that Snubble didn't get revived. And we got to see it happen on screen. In the Pokemon movie Power of Us, 50 years earlier, we see that Harriet, an elderly woman who hates Pokemon, had a Snubble who died in a fire while retrieving the key to the power plant. This death was so painful, it became the reason why Harriet hated Pokemon. Yup, this is the most brutal death any Pokemon in the entire franchise faced. But there might be some rare Pokemon that could survive such heat. If you're curious to know what Pokemon that is, check out this video where I covered 37 rarest Pokemon ever!